You can just imagine you've just been diagnosed with dementia. This is a life-limiting progressive illness. Their friends just keep their distance. They melt away. We need to be thinking about protecting our brain health. We need to think about it more broadly than an aged care issue. Yep. Another 1,500 children across Australia live with forms of dementia that are childhood dementia. Someone will get a dementia diagnosis and they'll be told, go home and get your affairs in order and I'll see you in 6 months, 12 months. People who live with dementia and their carers regularly tell us about the stigma and discrimination they experience. We need Australians to understand dementia. We need Australians to understand it's not a normal or inevitable part of ageing.
Before we get started, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode of our cutting-edge contemporary conversations. Thank you.
Welcome, Tanya Buchanan. How are you?
I'm well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for your time today. In this new environment of the aged care and the new act and the reform, there's so much happening. But before I wanted to interact and ask questions on that side, if you could give me a bit more your story, your growing up and your life story in terms of the purpose, how it has evolved to what you are, and as you're leading Dementia Australia, so what has transformed through your life to be doing this, what you're doing today?
My goodness, that's a big ask in a short time frame. I think
you can go longer.
I think for me, I feel like the various strands through my careers have come together, and that's brought me to Dementia Australia. So I started my career as a registered nurse and predominantly worked in areas that were related to neurosciences. So I also did a bit of a stint in oncology as well, but predominantly my clinical work was in neurosciences. And then, moving from nursing into more public health roles, and then, coming back to Australia. We lived in the UK for a few years, so we came back to Australia and, finished my PhD in public health, was the CEO for the Thoracic Society of Australia and New Zealand, and then the CEO for Cancer Council Australia, and then the role in Dementia Australia came up. And so for me, that brought together all of my career and training, and it married really well with some things that I was seeing in my own personal life as well around, older family members as well who are starting to engage with the aged care system. But I think it was also around being really clear that for dementia, we need to think about it more broadly than an aged care issue.
Yeah.
So this is a really important conversation for Australians to have. For far too many Australians, they think of it as a normal or inevitable part of ageing, and it's really important that we understand it isn't. While our risk of developing dementia goes up as we get older, our risk of developing heart disease goes up as we get older. Our risk of developing cancer goes up as we get older. And the difference is that those conditions now are well understood in terms of what we can do to reduce our risk, but they also have pretty good treatments and interventions. And so, we need to start thinking about dementia the same way that we think about our heart health or reducing our cancer risk, and recognising it's something we need to do across our life. And if we think about dementia in Australia right now, just under 500,000 Australians have dementia. Around 30,000 people who are under the age of 65 had what's called young-onset dementia. So that's any Australian adult under the age of 65, 18 to 65. In fact, I was looking recently, I think I saw one definition that had it from 14 to 65, which is quite rare. And then another 1,500 children across Australia live with forms of dementia that are childhood dementia. So
what age that would be?
So that is children, young children. Usually they're hitting their developmental milestones well in their sort of early years, 2, 3, 4, and then they have these rare neurological conditions that cause them to develop dementia. And unfortunately, more than half of those children die before their 10th birthday. So we really need to stop thinking about dementia purely within an aged care lens. It is an important issue for aged care, and start to think of dementia as a chronic condition that impacts across the life course. And so for me, that was a really important thing that I felt I could bring across to start, helping to have that conversation.
Thank you for educating as well on the understanding of dementia is not just 65 plus. as a conversation. Could I ask, in terms of your understanding of how is in terms of the care delivery or across, what are the key things to be notifying or to be understanding from a family point of view when you have a family member living with dementia, and where does the system supports, and where does the system leave some gaps for the families and communities to fill around?
So I think the important thing to recognise for people who are living with dementia is that they have to navigate one of two systems. So if they have young onset dementia, they're under age of 65, they need to navigate through the NDIS. And if they're over the age of 65, through the aged care system, on top of all of the things that they need to be working through as well, like their primary care, their acute health sector, community health. So these are all really important things to think about for people who are living with dementia, and it's incredibly complex to work your way through either of those systems, and they're not particularly easy to navigate at the best of times, but if you're living with a cognitive impairment, they can be just even a bit more difficult. So that's why Dementia Australia has been calling for the federal government to invest into navigations for people who are living with dementia, to help people understand the condition, because people don't understand the condition by and large, but also to understand and get to the help they need in a timely manner.
Everybody who would have young onset dementia, are almost everybody is on NDIS, or are how many are falling through the cracks?
So we don't have, or I don't have the latest figures to hand, but unfortunately, no, the vast majority are not on the NDIS. And so
it is not seen as long-term permanent disability, or is it some other reasons?
So there's probably a range of reasons. Some of it is about accessing the NDIS, and some of it is about having access through other areas. But there are significant challenges for dementia in the NDIS. It's not a stable condition. It is a progressive neurological condition. And so, people will say that they often can struggle, depending on who's doing their assessments in the NDIS, about understanding dementia as a disability. So it's important that we are making dementia and NDIS closer, so that we know that the people who are working in the NDIS and doing the planning and assessments really understand, what dementia is and the supports that are needed, and also that things change over time, and we need to have it quite responsive to those changes. And then on the flip side, we also are really concerned to make sure that people who have a diagnosis of dementia, if they're diagnosed, they also get the allied health supports they need. And so that is not NDIS necessarily or aged care, but, through chronic condition management, making sure that people are starting to think about, and GPs are starting to say, well, this is a chronic condition, and so we need to support you with some chronic condition plans.
How do you see across states and territories, is there any state-based or territory-based supports for people who are living with dementia through the health department or some state-based departments, or is it just primarily the NDIS or HFIL? That's the two streams you access.
So I think the first thing we need to say is that Dementia Australia provides a wide range of services for people of all ages living with dementia. So we run our National Dementia Helpline, which is available every day of the year. And it's available 24 hours a day. And then on top of that, we have a whole range of education and support and counselling programs that we make available to people who are impacted by dementia. And you don't need to be registered for My Aged Care or NDIS to access those services. So you can just call Dementia Australia directly on 1800 100 500 and be connected to the sort of information. 100 500. At any time of the day, any day of the year, and get answers to your questions and, connected to supports and services you need. And there are other agencies who are working in the space as well, who provide supports and services. And, depending on where you are across the country, they vary. So it's important, to make sure that we're keeping those supports and services that are available outside of NDIS and My Aged Care front of mind. But then there are services that people need to live independently and maximise their quality of life. And many of those come through My Aged Care and NDIS.
Can you share a very generic case study of a person living with dementia and what kind of a life they would have. But more of a generic, they can't pinpoint. I can understand it's a spectrum of services one would need, but what's a general person living with dementia would need and require on a regular basis?
I can't. And the reason I can't is because there are so many different forms of dementia. It really depends how old people are. So, someone who develops dementia in their early 50s with children who are still at school and who is in the sort of peak of their career, what they need is very different from someone who might be 75, who has finished their career, who is, maybe independently wealthy compared to someone who has, frontotemporal dementia or primary progressive aphasia. So the thing we would say regularly is that, everyone experiences dementia differently. And that's really important because it means that when we're thinking about the care and support that people need when they get a dementia diagnosis, you really need to understand that person's individual condition and their life and be making sure that you are supporting them to maximise their independence and quality of life.
In that case, which means you can't provide a vanilla template-based service, which means there is a strong role of case management and understanding of wraparound services or multidisciplinary supports. So because again, you have allied health practitioners being involved in many way or form. So how do you create that suite of solution or a support around one person?
So that is an excellent question. And so, that is why we've been calling for navigators to be funded, because we hear too often that someone will get a dementia diagnosis and they'll be told, go home and get your affairs in order and I'll see you in 6 months, 12 months. And you can just imagine you've just been diagnosed with dementia. This is a life-limiting progressive illness, and you don't know where to go to now. So at that point, people really need to be being supported to understand the condition. They need to be being supported to understand what services and supports are available.
As in somebody says, get your affairs in order. What does that mean?
It means to go home and think about your will, your enduring power of attorney, and your advanced care plan.
Is it pathetic to tell somebody you get your affairs in order if you are diagnosed with dementia and then you tell me go get your affairs in order as if I'm dying tomorrow?
It's
very harsh and disheartening.
I think it's, I don't think it's intended to be that way. I don't think it's intended to come across that way. But I think that, it is it would be a difficult pill to swallow after receiving that diagnosis. And so I think it's important that people, when they get their diagnosis, have that wraparound support and service so that they know, okay, I can understand what my next steps are. I know where to go to get more education and training about the service. As carers, I know what I need to be doing. So it's really important that we think about the impact of dementia on the whole family. And that's really, really important when we're thinking about people with young onset dementia, particularly where there are children in the family. So there's a range of considerations. And I think, to be fair, there is a lot of good practice that does happen, but it's not uniform and it's not consistent and it's not widely available across the country in the same way. And the other challenge, of course, is that we need people who are working in allied health roles to become trained up and confident and competent to work with people who are living with dementia. And so, even within healthcare roles, we know that lots of misunderstandings persist about what is dementia, that it's a memory issue, for example, without a real understanding of, just the impacts that dementia can have, that it can impact people's ability to process information visually or auditory processing. It impacts how we can perceive the world, as well as our memory, as well as our ability to do planning or to use words. So all of these things are really important when we're thinking about the care that someone might need to live independently and to have a good quality of life.
May I ask this, not that smart a question, but if I have to get assessed in some way or form, is it through a GP or a neurologist? Or a neurosurgeon or a psychiatry, where it starts?
So most people will go to their GP first first of all, and they will usually go to their GP and say that they've got some concerns about either their memory or, they're driving along maybe and they don't remember how they got there and they may be feeling a bit lost and can't get home, or they've noticed changes in their words. And so they'll go to their GP and have these conversations. I think if you can imagine that you're a GP and you've got a very short window of time to try and unpack that, it can be really difficult. Yeah. So I think it's important to understand that GPs are doing a lot of work in pretty constrained times, which is why, it does take more than 6 minutes to have a conversation. And it's also why Dementia Australia has developed a tool called Brain Track. And that is a tool that people can download for free. They can put it on their phone. And what it does is it's a travel game, and you play it for a period of time, and then you can take that app to your GP, and it gives your GP some really good data about things like your ability to recognise shapes and faces, to remember names, to recognise patterns, and so then they can see what's happening across time, and it gives the GP a bit more data to work with. So GPs will see people as a general point of call. Unfortunately, GPs are fairly constrained in Australia about what they can do in terms of ordering MRIs. And so usually what will happen is that they will get a referral. And so that referral could be to a range of specialists. It could be to a geriatrician, it could be to a neurologist, it could be a range of specialists, and they will make a specialist diagnosis. But on average in Australia, it will take you around 3 years to get a diagnosis. And actually, if you live with young-onset dementia, it can take quite a bit longer because it gets mistaken for other mental health conditions, and in women for menopause.
And all of this will be amplified, I'm assuming, when you are most of a specialist in regional towns. And if you are coming from CAL background, or you have living indigenous communities. So the penetration of assessment, which will take 3 years to start with, and then amplified with the regions we have, and Western Australia is much, much bigger. I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah.
Is the numbers what you're quoting is 500,000 people who are living with dementia or assessed having dementia? What's the real number then?
Well, dementia data in this country is not where we need it to be. And so that is one of the reasons it is one of the key priorities in the National Dementia Action Plan, because the data collection is not it's not as good as we would like it to be. So to pull that figure together, our friends at the AIHW have to do a lot of pulling through multiple data sets to get to it. I think, your point, though, is that in regional and rural Australia, it is no doubt more difficult to get a diagnosis. And then once you have a diagnosis, to access services and supports that would enable you to continue to live independently as long as possible, because they're either not available or they're too far away. And so that's when, we also start to see flow-on impacts as well for carers and family members who are carers, because there's not supports for them necessarily either.
Still, sustaining a conversation with multiple specialists, it costs money. Mm-hmm. Is it supported through in Medicare, the whole process of assessment, or is it privately funded?
So, the Australian universal access for healthcare is the same for dementia. So, you can choose to go through public and private systems, and there is the pros and cons of that. I think the challenge is not the funding that's out of pocket for diagnosis, and there will no doubt be some, but the challenge is the ongoing impact of what does it look like financially for people. So, there are things that you can do after a diagnosis that will help to potentially delay progression and can help you to maintain your independence. Some of that's around how you set up your home. Some of that is things like physical activity. Some of it is about looking after your hearing and your vision. And all of those things, when you start to add them up, also have financial implications, as well as your travel, to undertake things like gym exercises at a time when you probably are starting to think about either not working or you've stopped working. So it's there's ongoing costs for people after a dementia diagnosis that we haven't also really grappled with yet. And then with the recent changes to the home care package support at home program, of course, we now have the flow on of the co-contributions.
One piece is more of understanding of practitioners, and there are many practitioner bodies, and for the young onset, young people for that early dementia under 65, as in for NDIS, a lot of the OTs are the ones who are assessing people. So I think, is it fair? Are you working closely with the peak bodies there to add that part of the curriculum, or with the universities in terms of curriculum creating to add the conversation on dementia, that this is one of the things you need to be aware of, to be seen as a disability, not just seen as that age or the elderly thing?
Look, I think our friends in the allied care sector are well aware at the peak body level, and we've done a lot of work with peak bodies. The challenge for all health professional training at the university level is, they have a small period of time to train healthcare professionals and this myriad of conditions that they need to cover. And so that's why Dementia Australia has taken an approach to training that is very experiential. So we have developed a range of virtual reality and artificial intelligence style training, because what we find is that if we do the sort of standard classroom training where we talk people through it, they can sometimes know it but not understand or put it into practice. And so a 30-minute lecture in a curriculum that's jam-packed doesn't necessarily translate into best practice. But when we see people completing some of our training and they do that experiential training and they really understand what is it like to be in this environment of someone living with dementia, and really get to grips with the whole concept of person-centred care, they're able to go back into their workplace and make really great changes. And that's across the board for allied health workers, disability workers, for aged care workers. And that's what we're really focused on, is having a focus on training that actually is immediately able to be implemented into practice.
I don't know, but whether probably one could add those training programs as part of CPD points for each and every peak bodies, if they can add, and that'll be part of the curriculum easily delivered. On the AI tools you were talking about, there were many tools around social isolation, which interacting with the elderly Australians or elderly people around the world to have that conversation. Are you seeking out, looking for, or have you created a tool in which somebody who's identified dementia very recently, and then the things which you said you can do at home, can that be replicated via a tool?
So our AI is around training. So we use it to train workers. So we have some lovely AI avatars that interact with students so that they learn through the process of that interaction and change the way in which they're interacting. And that means that students get to experience very different scenarios that would have have options for them to then understand why things unfolded the way they did, and then go back into their workplace and adjust their way of working. I think, there is a lot of discussion around, can we use AI and avatars to address loneliness and social isolation? It's an interesting idea, but I think, we're also talking about the need for real human connection. And so I don't think we can replace real human connection.
Because people who might get diagnosed with dementia, they might slowly, I don't know, if I will have dementia, I wouldn't probably naturally reduce my circle of friends, or people who can intimately understand my challenges, if I have one, as in through dementia. And I think that social circle of either friends or community or family and carers becomes very critical at the early stages of supporting this person. And how do you see that the role of society, community, carers to support this person who had been diagnosed?
It's crucial. So people who live with dementia and their carers regularly tell us about the stigma and discrimination they experience. Discrimination. And so I'll talk about that in a minute. So what they talk about is the sense almost that that people think somehow dementia is contagious. And so their friends, not actually contagious, but that's how they behave. So that their friends just keep their distance. They melt away. And that's really unfortunate. And the reason that happens is because people don't understand dementia. They don't know or feel comfortable about interacting with their friend or loved one who has a diagnosis. And, you know, carers and people living with dementia will tell us stories about, you know, the person who is living with dementia, once they tell people about their diagnosis, being treated as less clever than they are, or being ignored, or people only talking to the carer and not speaking to the person who is right there in front of them. So this is a real problem. And on top of that, when we think about the impacts...
I'm struggling with understanding that situation.
It is a really significant problem. And I think the thing to bear in mind is that social isolation is a risk factor for dementia in and of itself. And if you are living with dementia, you know, we need you to stay socially connected. There's good research and good evidence about the importance of staying socially connected to maximise your cognitive function and your quality of life. And so the other area that's really important is we need to start thinking about dementia-enabling environments. So if you are living with dementia and your ability to navigate your environment is changed because of it, so things like particular patterns on carpets or glare off lights, or all white environments, it means that you're less able to be active in your community. And so if you think about a standard, you know, community recreation centre change room, and you go into that change room and it's all white, the bathroom stalls are all white, the entry and exit doors are all white. When you go into the bathroom, there's a white bathroom, white toilet, white lid. As a person living with dementia, that's an incredibly difficult place for you to be. And it's entirely possible you may not be able to find your way back out of that environment. All it would take is some signage or some colour differentiation to enable people living with dementia to be able to use those spaces independently. And so it's important that we start to think about that as an enabling environment, because it's those things that enable people living with dementia to remain active in their community.
I can't get over the discrimination part of it.
I think, you know, we need to talk about stigma, and we need to talk about raising people's understanding and awareness. It is why we run dementia-friendly communities, because that is important that people who live in, and 2 in 3 people who live with dementia live in their community. So, you know, this is a community issue, and as communities and particularly local governments, there is a real need for them to respond and ensure that the environment they are responsible for, the building they are responsible for, are just as they would, you know, make them wheelchair friendly. They need to start thinking about making them
Dementia friendly.
You know, dementia friendly. And if we think about that nearly 500,000 people living with dementia now, in the coming decades, that figure is set to more than double.
Mm-hmm. And if you can't track it, you can't solve it. You know? And if it is the most bearable of so many challenges one might face, so numbers still there, probably you haven't counted. Very disheartening to know that it's discriminated upon. Handheld on that, but I have to move on to the next one. From a workforce point of view, and corporates, people who are working head of a community, is who are, and if it gets like the younger age, 55, 50, still they have another 20, 30 years of working life. Do you think corporate Australia is dementia enabled or dementia understanding or aligned?
No, I don't think we are across the country. It is a issue that I think, you know, we saw in the news this week that 7 in 10 employers said that they, you know, would not employ someone with a health condition. And so if you then think about what that looks like, you have a cognitive decline and they've got a condition that is a cognitive decline condition, employers are not keen to think about what that looks like. So, you know, there are there are just as many reasons to think about reasonable adjustments. And we have certainly heard of some examples where people have been able to stay in their workplace with reasonable adjustments. So, again, it's about employers working with individuals on a one-to-one basis to understand their strengths and how they can continue to contribute in the workforce should they choose to do so.
What's the research found as get diagnosed as a young person or as the cognitive function is reducing? Is the intellectual capacity capabilities also reducing, or is it stays the same?
So I think, people don't stop being smart because they get a dementia diagnosis. What happens is that their ability to plan may change, their ability to use words may change, their ability to manipulate numbers may change. But that person is still the same person, that we saw before a diagnosis. And the ways in which those changes manifest vary from individual to individual and over different timeframes. So it's really about recognising where the person is at that point in time and what strengths they have and working on their strengths.
So there's no decline in intellectual capability, so there is no need to be saying that because if you have dementia, I might not employ you, or you might have to leave in the next 6 months, or I might performance manage you out in next 6 months, 1 year. So are there stories like those?
So I think it's important to say that where people have a dementia diagnosis, we need to be looking at the individual, what their preferences are for continuing in work. Not everyone will want to continue in work, and it really depends at where they are at in their dementia diagnosis. But for as long as people want to continue to work and are capable of continuing to work, and that they have strengths that are useful for them to use for themselves and for the employer, then we should really be looking at how we facilitate it.
And from a point of view of every state and territories as well, how does the interaction of dementia through the departments like health, how is the experience of WA through the correction services department or justice?
So the people working in those departments?
Yes, or people who are going through the justice system have dementia. How is that for you?
So I think no matter where people are in the community, we hear that people don't understand dementia. Whether people are receiving aged care services from aged care workers who do not have dementia training, whether they're in the acute health sector where their length of stay is longer than people who do not have dementia and their outcomes often worse, whether they are going through the correctional service, people living with dementia really deserve to be cared for and supported by people who understand the condition. And so that is why we have been very vocal about calling for mandatory dementia training, particularly for aged care for disability workers, also for first responders, and also in the acute sector and in primary care.
Recently, there's a lot of aged care reform has happened. What do you see the opportunities and risks both ways? From the New Age Care Act and the reform being implemented from a dementia point of view?
So I think the important part of the reform is that it is a rights-based piece of legislation. And importantly for people with dementia, they have rights. And so those rights now need to be recognised and they need to be supported to have those rights recognised. The other piece that we're very pleased about in reforms, not in the legislation, is the requirement for dementia training in the standards. The challenge for us is what does that look like in practice? Because as I said earlier, we can do a bit of a chalk and talk 30-minute, checklist type approach to training, and it's just not going to stick. Or we can do things that are really experiential training that really make a difference. And so for us, we do want to see good quality dementia training embedded into all aged care providers' work and continuously improved. And we have a range of tools at Dementia Australia to support aged care providers to do that, as do our colleagues at a range of other providers like Dementia Training Australia or the Looking Institute, and a whole pile of providers out there who can be supporting aged care providers to do this well. So that's really important that we start to see that done, and we start to see it done to a high standard, because people who live in aged care facility and residential aged care, they deserve nothing less than being cared for by people who are competent in their care. And people who are living in the community and receiving aged care services through support at home also deserve nothing less than being supported by people who understand the condition.
Because dementia cuts across NDIS there, and then both sectors have gone through reform and updating their legislation. If there are parallels drawn, or is it similar experience for somebody with dementia to experience NDIS and aged care system, or are there two different experiences they get?
I think they're very different experiences at this point in time. So I think, the NDIS experience is probably more the challenge of having dementia recognised as an condition that needs to be supported through the NDIS. But once people are successful with that, they get a fairly good level of support by and large, with some challenges around reassessment. For aged care reforms, I think there is an acceptance that dementia is an issue that we need to be alert to, but I think we've thought of it too long as somehow the inevitable or normal part of aging, rather than starting to think about how do we delay progression, how do we support people who live independently and stay with the best quality of life that they can have for as long as possible. And so I think they're different challenges, and both are fairly large challenges to overcome.
In conclusion, how might we create Australia, the communities understand, love and care people who have for the
So I think there are a few things. The first thing is we need Australians to understand dementia. We need Australians to understand it's not a normal or inevitable part of ageing, that there are things we can do to reduce our risk and maintain our brain health. And I'm not talking about starting in your 60s or 70s, although it's never too late. I'm talking about starting as young adults, because many types of dementia, those changes in our brains are decades before symptoms. So for people in their teenage years, we want to see that protecting their heads and having good education. And then right through our life, we need to be thinking about protecting our brain health so that we reduce our risk of developing dementia. That's the first bit. The second thing we need to be thinking about is what can we do to make our environments and our communities more supportive, so that people who are living with dementia are able to participate fully in communities without those instances where they really do experience stigma and/or discrimination. And then we also need our workforce, our professional workforce, whether it's our aged care workforce, our disability workforce, our acute sector workforce, our first responder workforce, and our primary care teams, to be completely skilled up and capable and have the capacity to work effectively with people with dementia. I can't think of other conditions, other chronic conditions, where we would say, you don't need to be trained to manage your condition. You're that person who's experiencing these things. That's not something I can think of in other areas. So I think it's vital that we think about how we upskill our care workforce to support people living with dementia regardless of their age. And it's one of the reasons as well why our childhood dementia initiative called for a child dementia centre for excellence for care, so they start to drive these clinical care environments where people are skilled up.
Thanks a lot.